If you're a high-achieving Christian man and your marriage feels more like a business partnership than a covenant, you need to hear this. Not because you're a bad person, not because you don't love your wife, but because something has quietly shifted. And if you don't catch it now, you won't catch it until it's too late. I've watched it happen to men I respect, men of faith, men who give to their church, who lead in their communities, who are genuinely trying to honor God with their lives, and their marriages are slipping right through their hands. That's what we're going to talk about today. You're busy. Trust me, I know that. You've got a business to run, a team to lead, and decisions to make. You've got a mission and you believe in it deeply. And somewhere in the rhythm of all of that, your wife started feeling like one more item on your schedule. She hasn't said it outright, but you feel the distance. You feel it when you get home and the conversation is surface level. You feel it when she stops bringing things to you, stops inviting you into her world and into her heart. She's still there. She's just stopped expecting you to show up the way she used to hope that you would. You haven't cheated. You haven't been cruel, but something else has happened and something has been replaced. And the scary part, you've been so focused on building something that matters that you didn't even notice it happening. This is the conversation most men never have until they're sitting across from a counselor or a divorce attorney. I don't want that to be your story. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why this happens to high-achieving men specifically, not just in general, but why the very things that make you good at what you do are the same things working against your marriage. You're going to understand the root of it, not the surface symptoms, but what's actually driving the drift. And you're going to walk away with a way of thinking about your marriage that will change how you make decisions, not just about your calendar, but about your identity. I've lived this personally. I lost my first wife to cancer after 10 months of being sick. I watched what suffering and grief can do to a man's sense of self. And in that darkness, I had to go back personally to the roots of who I was and rebuild from the inside out. What I learned in that season informs everything I'm going to share with you right now. So stay with me. What I'm about to walk you through is worth your full attention. Here's where I need to start. And I want you to sit with this before you react. Most men, when they hear the word mistress, assume it means another person. And sometimes it does. But the way I've seen it play out most often, especially among Christian men, men of character, men who would never cross that line, it's the mission, it's the business, it's the nonprofit, it's the church build out. I've walked with the business owners who love God, serve their families, and are known in their communities as generous people, good men. And yet their marriages were quietly dying because they made a decision unconsciously that the mission was the main thing, and everything else, including the marriage, would get what was left. The wife starts to notice she's always second, and at first, she'll say something. She'll bring it up, maybe more than once, but over time, if nothing changes, she stops saying it. She adjusts her expectations, and that right there is the most dangerous moment in a marriage. Not when she's upset, when she stops being upset, when she's accepted the arrangement. Now, here's the part most men miss. They're not doing it because they don't care. They genuinely believe they're providing. They're building something for their family. The lie they accepted is this: I'm doing this for them. I want you to stop. Ask yourself right now, does your wife agree with that? Because if you haven't asked her, if her voice doesn't carry real weight in how you allocate your time, then you're making decisions for your family, not with your family. And that's a problem no amount of financial success can fix. Before I get to why this happens at the root level, and I think hit some of you hard, I really do, I want to tell you what the warning signs look like in my own life. Now, here's where it gets deeper. Most high achievers are driven by something they've never fully examined. And when I say this, I'm not pointing a finger. I'm holding up a mirror because I had to look at this same thing in myself. The root of this drift is almost always identity. Achievers measure their worth by output, by results, by how much they produce. That's what makes them effective in business. But it's also what quietly distorts their inner world. When your value is tied to what you do, you will unconsciously gravitate toward the places that validate that value. The business gives you feedback. You close a deal, the numbers move, you feel it. The church responds when you lead well. People thank you. you feel significant. But marriage doesn't work like that. Marriage doesn't give you a quarterly report. Your wife's emotional state is not a KPI. If you're wired to perform your way to value, the marriage starts to feel like an environment where you can't quite win, and you drift toward the things where you can. I call this the performance mindset, and I carried it for years without knowing it. Growing up as the youngest in a family with older siblings who had made a lot of painful choices, I became the one who had it all together, the one who didn't fall apart, the one who was okay. And that role followed me into my adult life, into my ministry, into my marriage. I had emotions I didn't know what to do with. I would feel something churning and I didn't have a language for it. So I pushed it down and I performed my way through. It wasn't until I sat in a counseling retreat after losing my wife and my mother within the same month that I finally had to reckon with the fact that I had been emotionally unavailable. Not because I didn't care, but because I had never learned how to feel. Most high-achieving men have a version of this story. Now here's where it gets practical. And I'll keep going right after this next point because the next one is where most men make the biggest strategic mistake. Real quick, if what I'm talking about is resonating and you want to go deeper on this personally, I do a 30-minute virtual coffee where we can sit down and talk through where you actually are and what might need to shift. So no pitch, no pressure. Link is in the description. But let me keep going because the next piece is the one that could change everything for most of you. I've watched men structure their lives in a way that looks like they're honoring God, but it's actually just organized busyness. And this is where I want to say something that might be uncomfortable. You can serve God and still lose intimacy with Him. You can do things for God and not actually be with God. The act of doing is not the same thing as relationship. And when a man's relationship with God becomes a function, a role, a performance, everything downstream suffers because the foundation is hollow. The priority order I believe in and the one I try to live goes like this. God first, not God as a category on your calendar, but God as the actual source from which you move. Then marriage, then everything else. And notice what I said, everything else. The business, the church, the nonprofit, the platform, all of it should serve the marriage, not compete with it. Now I know what some of you are thinking, Chris, I've heard this before, put God first, family second. Yes, but I'm talking about something more concrete than a prioritization chart. I'm talking about daily accountability to the health of your marriage. Every single day, my wife, Mallory, and I have what I call a heart-to-heart. It's not a meeting, it's a conversation where I genuinely try to get the pulse of where she is, how she's feeling, whether she's experienced me as present or absent, whether there is something she needs to say that she hasn't said yet. This is not a performance. This is not a check-the-box routine. It came out of learning painfully that the distance between two people grows one unspoken thing at a time. And before any major decision in my life gets made, we audit our level of connectedness first. If Mallory and I are thin right now, if there's been a stretch of long hours and too much distance, then I don't take the speaking engagement. I don't commit to the trip, not because the opportunity isn't real, but because the foundation matters more than the opportunity. Here's the best way I know to describe what marriage actually requires of high-achieving men. Marriage is like paddling upstream. The moment you stop working on it, you're not staying still. You're drifting. The current of life, the demands of work, the noise of everything you're building will carry you away from your wife without you choosing it. Drift is the default. Intentionality is the choice. And here's what makes it hard for achievers specifically. We're wired to optimize. We look at something, assets, whether it's efficient, and allocate accordingly. But you can't optimize your way into emotional intimacy. You can't find the most efficient path to your wife feeling truly known by you. It requires presence. It requires consistency. It requires you to show up on the days when there's no crisis to solve and no milestone to celebrate. Just the ordinary Tuesday evening, sitting with her, actually there. I know what you're thinking right now. I'm already so stretched, I don't have more to give. And that's where you are. That's worth paying attention to because that feeling, that sense of being maxed out and having nothing left for the people closest to you, it's a signal, not of weakness, but one of misalignment. The question worth asking is not, how do I fit my wife in? The question is, what am I building that is actually worth more than my marriage? I want to pause right there. Sit with that question. I want you to feel that question, because here is what I believe, and I believe it from the core of who I am. One of the greatest legacies a man can leave in this world is a marriage that endures, a family that's whole. Your children will remember whether their parents loved each other well or not. The people around you will know not just what you built, but who you were. And at the end, when the business is sold or the platform is gone or the building has a different name on it, the marriage is what remains. Now I want to take you somewhere that connects directly with what we just talked about. Because a lot of high achieving men who are facing this drift in their marriages aren't just dealing with misplaced priorities. They're dealing with something deeper, something spiritual. They're in a season where God feels quiet, where they're praying and not hearing anything back, where they've been faithful in things still working. And that silence can be disorienting for a man who's used to moving and building and seeing results. I made a video specifically on that, and it's called, "What Does God's Silence Actually Mean?" And if you've been in a season where you're trying to trust God, but the silence is making you question everything, that video is going to give you a framework for understanding what's actually happening in those moments and why the silence is not what you think it is. That video is right here. Watch it next, and it'll add another layer to everything we just covered today. I want to close with something that I don't say often enough out loud. There was a point in my life after I lost my first wife, Amber, to cancer, and then lost my mother 30 days later, where I didn't want to be here anymore. Not in the way people sometimes mean by that. I wasn't making a plan, but I had lost the pull of life. I didn't feel the draw forward. I was going through motions, and what brought me back more than anything else was relationship, people who showed up, community that held me when I couldn't hold myself. I tell you that because I think a lot of high achieving men are walking around with a version of that same feeling. Not necessarily grief like mine, but a quiet emptiness beneath the accomplishment, a disconnection from the people closest to them, a loneliness that doesn't have a name because everything on the outside looks fine. Your marriage has the potential to be the place where that changes, where you are actually known, where you don't have to perform, where you come home and someone actually sees you. Not the version of you that closes deals or leads teams, just you. But it requires you to want that more than you want to be impressive. That's the real question at the end of all of this. Not whether you have the right systems or the right priorities on paper. What do you want your marriage to actually be? Because what you want, what you're willing to protect and pursue, is what it will become. And it starts here.